Hello English students, particularly those of you studying A-level language and literature, and welcome to this lesson which is an analysis of the poem Meantime, which is the titular poem from the collection Meantime by Carol Ann Duffy, and this is the last in a series of poems which we have been looking at as part of the A-level course. If you haven't already done so, I recommend that you read through this poem multiple times, looking at reading it in different ways so that you can explore voice and hear the poem. You could pause the video right now and do so. Meantime. The clock slid back an hour and stole light from my life as I walked through the wrong part of town, mourning our love. And of course, unmendable rain fell to the bleak streets, where I felt my heart gnaw at all our mistakes. If the darkening sky could lift more than 1 hour from this day, there are words I would never have said, nor have heard you say. But we will be dead, as we know, beyond all light. These are the shortened days and the endless nights. In summary, this poem uses the turning back of the clocks as a poetic conceit for relationship breakup. The poetic voice recalls walking home through the town on a wet night after the end of a relationship. The themes in this poem are love and relationships, separation and parting, so in some ways a romantic theme, but also the themes that run throughout the collection of time, regret and mortality are all present. The poetic voice here is intimate and confessional. The former lover, i.e. the other person in the breakup, is directly addressed, and you very much get the feeling that this feels like a poem written from the poet's own personal experience. What Duffy is conveying in this poem about time, about places, about people and events, you will form your own impression from your study of the poem. But some key knowledge that you may need, which is worth exploring. The key knowledge to this is that at the end of British summertime, we turn the clocks back 1 hour. And in the UK, this happens on the last Sunday in October. As a result, from that point onwards, the evenings get darker an hour earlier, and this change very much obviously marks the transition away from summer and towards winter, as things feel much darker after the clocks go back. Poetic conceit is a kind of an extended metaphor in a poem that compares two quite dissimilar things. You may recall from the poem Valentine that an onion is used as a kind of poetic conceit for love, and similarly the clocks going back here is a kind of conceited metaphor for the breakup of a relationship. One interesting concept that we can borrow from French is something called l'esprit d'escalier, which literally means the spirit of the staircase. And this refers to the sensation of clearly thinking about an interaction after it is too late to reply. It kind of captures that feeling of knowing exactly what you should have done or said as you walk away from a situation. And it captures the way that we perhaps tend to think about difficult situations or explore possibilities after it's too late to act. And I very much feel like l'esprit d'escalier is a good way of thinking about what happens in this poem. What distinctive features are there in this poem language-wise? Well, there are a number related to grammar, which we'll look at in the close examination. But overall, tense and modality are used significantly in this poem. The poem shifts tense from past to present to the future, and then finally returns to the present tense. And these tense shifts help to explore these feelings of powerlessness in regards to time, regret about an unchangeable past, and feelings of futility about the future, and perhaps a sense of being trapped in the present. With regard to lexis and semantics, there are a number of figurative uses of language related to theft, related to permanence, and related to death, which is a major theme. Time particularly is personified using these dynamic verbs: slid, stole, and lift. These all suggest a kind of change in time, but also they imply dishonesty or trickery. The metaphor here is that time is a thief, which is a kind of a common idiom anyway. But it's the idea that clocks changing backwards do so imperceptibly without us really noticing, and that we lose this hour of our lives without really becoming obviously aware of it. So time, I guess, is personified through those verbs as a thief. Obviously, that is also a metaphor for relationship breakup and the idea that you might not realize what's happening as a relationship falls apart. It might do so imperceptibly. Other lexis chosen there conveys the permanence of change in time. This is such as adjectives unmendable and endless, and the preposition beyond, suggesting, I guess, that powerlessness that we feel in regards to time. There are also a theme of death. There's also a theme of death running through this poem, with more directly morbid references. The metaphor mourning our love in the first stanza, but then in the final stanza we have this really bluntly dysphomistic "we will be dead," or the allusion of shortened days, which I think is also an allusion to death. So time, death, and relationship breakup are all here metaphorically connected. Final distinctive language feature running in the poem is grammar and the use of person and clusivity. We know that clusivity refers to whether person is used inclusively or exclusively, and a kind of a division between inclusive and exclusive pronouns is used in the first couple of stanzas, where the inclusive possessive person is used to capture the past. So mourning our love or our mistakes. This is where it's inclusive, so it's shared between both of them, but also it's possessive, it's something that they own jointly. And this is contrasted with the first person singular possessive as she walks away and considers my life and my heart. So what was in the past shared through that inclusive use of person has now become singular as she walks away from the breakup. The division between singular first and second person is present later in the third stanza, where she thinks about the words I would never have said nor have heard you say, and I and you, the division between the first and second person there, clearly presents that during the argument their different perspectives are divided by that divided use of person. Ironically, they are reunited in terms of using the inclusive perspective we in the fourth stanza, but they are reunited in that very dark line, we will be dead as we know. And the repetition of we, I suppose, is kind of an ironic reflection that they will be unified in the future as all things become meaningless and as they die. For close analysis, this is quite a detailed close analysis, but the poem is a very good model for looking at some key grammatical features, particularly modality, tense, and dexis. So in that second half of the poem is slipping from a past tense description in stanzas 1 or 2 into a more reflective use of language in stanzas 3 and 4. And that shift at the halfway point of the poem is achieved through a clever use of modality, of tense, and a dexis, all of which are exploring those feelings of frustrated regret and morbid certainty about the future in this poem. I think this is done quite cleverly. If we look at what's highlighted in red here, we can see that the third stanza, compared to stanzas 1 and 2, shifts into using modal language, particularly the epistemic modality constructed by that conjunction if and the modal verb could, which is presenting a kind of desire for the impossible, this need to turn back time to before the relationship actually ended. If the darkening sky could lift more than 1 hour from this day, if I could turn back the clock, if it were possible. We know that modality related to possibility and chance is epistemic, but I also think that as the stanza continues, and she ruminates that there are words I would never have said, nor have heard you say. The second modal there, would never have said, I think is a deontic modal, which is related to desire, permission and obligation. Because I think that would represents her desire. I think it represents her wish to be able to take back those words. Regardless of how you interpret that, this shift to modal language gives an overall reflective tone to this stanza, and the overall effect perhaps is conveying how this sense of regret about your actions can lead to the kind of fantasy about doing things differently, and we tend to try and replay through our conditional thinking, if you like. I should have done that, I could have done, if only. It's the l'esprit d'Escaillé as observed earlier in the key knowledge section. Those weak modals, could and would, discussing possibilities that we ultimately know won't come true, help to create a kind of contrast as things take a much more serious and direct shift into stanza 4. Weak modalities, and these two are weak modals, express possibilities or conditions in a weak sense, whereas the modal we will be dead conveys certainty, and so we can characterize that as a strong modal. And the shift between this if, could, would to we will be dead actually conveys some quite strong and powerful meanings, I think. It conveys to me how despite all of our wishful thinking, despite all of our fantasies that we might be able to go back and change events, there is a certainty that all things will end, and future is in many ways unavoidable. Elsewhere, as previously discussed, the poem uses tense shifts to follow a pattern from the past to the present to the future, and in many ways those are tied up with modality. You may have looked at arguments as to whether there is a future tense in English, because the future tense in English is constructed through modality, through the use of modal auxiliaries will be. So tense and modality are in many ways tied up together, and those tense shifts from the past to the present to the future give us this idea of powerlessness and inability to change, and how we are condemned, I guess, to live in the present. Finally, if you can look at what's highlighted in green, there are a number of, I think, clever uses of proximal dexis in these two stanzas, which help to situate this kind of reflective thought in a particular moment in time quite cleverly. Remember that dexis is language that centers what's happening around a particular moment in time, or expresses a position relative to a particular moment in time. And dexis can be proximal, meaning close, or distal, meaning distant. For example, we have this, which is proximal, and that, which is distal. If you look, the temporal dexis, i.e. dexis that expresses a position in time in these two stanzas, is proximal. This is this day and these are the shortened days, as opposed to that day and those were the shortened days. That helps to situate these reflections in a particular moment in time. We understand that these thoughts and reflections are occurring on the day of the argument, as the speaker in the poem, or the voice in the poem, is walking home. And these are her reflections in that moment. And I think that helps to give the poem kind of raw immediacy, as well as a sense of a captured moment in time. These are the shortened days and the endless nights. Okay, well done for following that. As I said, there's quite some complex and quite subtle grammatical effects in these stanzas, but an excellent model of how poets use modality and dexis to create subtle effects on the reader. Thinking about connections, you could consider in this poem how ideas about regret and possibly even mortality are expressed compared to the poem's Small Female Skull. This would make an interesting contrast to the way that relationships are represented in First Love, which I have to say is a much more positive portrayal of a past relationship. You could think about the way that time is presented, particularly timelessness or the inability to return to time in a poem like Never Go Back. But you could also think of the way that we experience memory compared to a poem like Beachcomber. I wonder what other choices you would make, what other connections you can form between this and other poems, particularly looking at particular features. Finally then, if you are interested in poetry, here are a few more words for you, this time by Christina Rossetti, taken from a collection Goblin Market and Other Poems, and this one is called Remember. Remember me when I am gone away into the silent land, when you can no more hold me by the hand, nor I half turn to go, yet turning stay. Remember me when no more day by day you tell me of our future that you planned. Only remember me. You understand, it will be late to counsel then or pray. Yet if you should forget me for a while, and afterwards remember, do not grieve. For if the darkness and corruption leave a vestige of the thoughts that once I had, better by far you should forget and smile, then you should remember and be sad. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope you find these videos useful. Be sure to check out the other ones in the series.